Welcome back to another 2019 NFL mock draft. This one won't be as goofy as the last one since it's mid-season and I really just need to get this out there before another week of NFL games happens and then forces me to reconsider the order and second guess the priority of needs for every team. And then this one's also just going to be a meat and potatoes kind of mock draft, and probably my last one until the playoffs. The pumpkin spice one was fun to make, but it really took a long time to add all the extra fluff, and then I had this back and forth with the NFL trying to demonetize the video. So I'm going to continue to increase the visual effects and add highlights as we go on, but for now I'm going to go back to the basics. Before we get started, I want to thank you for checking this video out. I would love to hear your thoughts and comments on the picks, and please feel free to share your constructive criticism with the video itself also. I'm going to be doing a ton of mock drafts this upcoming year, even though my own team doesn't have a first round pick, and I want to make sure I'm making them visually appealing to everyone as well as informative. For those of you that don't like to leave comments, please hit that like button. The goal for this video is 500 likes. If this video reaches 500 likes, I will have a new mock draft after week 17 when the order of the top 20 picks is completely set. Thanks again for checking this out. Let's get started. With the first pick, I have the Oakland Raiders selecting Ohio State edge rusher Nick Bosa. John Gruden has taken a team that is only 2 years removed from a 12-4 season and gutted them to the point where they are now the worst team in the NFL with one of the oldest rosters. The Raiders have managed to collect a total of 5 first-round picks in this mass exodus, but their track record in the draft has not been so great. In fact, Khalil Mack and Amari Cooper are the only first-round picks that have panned out for the Raiders in the last 6 or 7 drafts. Also, last year the Raiders had a leak of their interest in Notre Dame offensive tackle Mike McGlinchey, and the 49ers snagged him with the pick right before them. Instead of having a backup option, the Raiders took a weak offer to trade back and literally took the next prospect on their draft board at the same position. If it was a strong offensive tackle class, that would be one thing, but it was widely known that offensive tackle was one of the weakest positions available in an otherwise deep pool of potential at other positions. In short, the Raiders need this first overall pick so they can't screw it up. Nick Bosa is about as much as a sure thing as you're going to get in this draft while also filling their biggest need. With the second pick, I have the New York Giants selecting Oregon quarterback Justin Herbert. The Giants really lucked out. After passing on a quarterback in the deepest quarterback draft class in almost a decade for a running back, albeit a very rare talent at the running back position, they managed to suck enough the following year to land another top draft pick and get themselves in position to address the most important position in sports once again. I think that the reports of Justin Herbert being unsure if he's going to declare for the draft are just nonsense, and it's more likely just him being a good teammate to his fellow Oregon Ducks and make it sound like he's focused fully on this season and not the draft. He's actually really talented and he physically has the ideal traits that you want at the quarterback position, although the only questions that you have for him is if he's able to diagnose the plays ideally, but he still might have been one of the top quarterbacks available if he had come out last year too. With the third pick, I have the Buffalo Bills selecting Houston defensive tackle Ed Oliver. The Bills don't have a dire need at defensive tackle, and they could pass on Ed Oliver after signing Star Lutulele last offseason, but unless they're getting a nice trade down package, I don't see another option here. Ed Oliver has got Aaron Donald potential, and Kyle Williams can't play forever. I would go ahead and take the best player available here if I were them. With the fourth pick, I have the Arizona Cardinals selecting Alabama offensive tackle Jonah Williams. The Cardinals' offensive line has been a big part of their struggles in 2018. Mike McCoy didn't help, but it's pretty evident that they need to address the offensive line for the future, and Jonah Williams is a legit top 10 prospect at the left tackle position. With the fifth pick, I have the San Francisco 49ers selecting Clemson defensive end Clelin Ferrell. The 49ers have spent quite a few draft picks along the defensive line, but they've been distributed over 2 different defensive schemes, so another 4-3 edge rusher is needed to improve their defense as a whole. Solomon Thomas hasn't been as good as I thought he would be at this point in his development, but another threat on the opposite side could take some pressure off of him with DeForest Buckner still in the middle. That leaves Eric Armstead as kind of the odd man out here, and they could use him as potential trade bait. With the sixth pick, I have the New York Jets selecting Florida State edge rusher Brian Burns. Brian Burns in the top 10 is the first surprise pick in this mock draft. He is an athletic freak that's just on a crappy team, and I think that as the draft process goes forward, he's going to be a quick riser on draft board. The Jets just need more pass rush right now. They're probably going to move on from head coach Todd Bowles sooner than later. Brian Burns would be a perfect 3-4 edge rusher, but with the other pieces they have on their defensive line, I think that he could fit in either scheme as an edge rusher. Then I have the Denver Broncos selecting Georgia cornerback DeAndre Baker. In my last mock, I had the Broncos taking Drew Lock, but I'm not sure that they're going to use such a high pick on a prospect that won't grade out as a top 10 prospect at the quarterback position. Basically, if you passed on Josh Rosen last year at number 5, you're probably not going to take Drew Lock this year at number 7. DeAndre Baker is my favorite cornerback in the 2019 NFL Draft, and while Greedy Williams might be more physically gifted, I think that DeAndre Baker is not that far behind, but he has the instincts of an elite NFL cornerback too. I've got the Cleveland Browns selecting Wisconsin offensive tackle David Edwards. So a lot of Browns fans want them to take another cornerback, and even though I had DeAndre Baker going before Greedy Williams, I could totally see them both as top 10 draft picks in this draft class. And even though the Browns used the 4th overall pick on a cornerback last year, they could totally draft another one with their 1st round pick this year. It makes sense. However, it's pretty rare that a team drafts the same position in the 1st round in back-to-back drafts. So filling the hole left by Joe Thomas should be the move for whomever they hire as head coach next year. Wisconsin is an NFL offensive line factory, and David Edwards is certainly cut from the same cloth. This would allow the undrafted free agent Desmond Harrison to move to right tackle where he might be better suited in the long run and give the Browns 2 solid bookend tackles for the next decade. Then I've got the Miami Dolphins selecting Alabama defensive lineman Raekwon Davis. The Dolphins are going to be a tough team to project moving forward because you don't know the plan with Ryan Tannehill. They can save a ton of cap space by cutting Tannehill, and let's be honest, he's proven to be as inconsistent as they come. If they do move on from Tannehill, I'm sure that he'll find a place to compete as a starter with a smaller cap hit. But he's just too old and overpaid to call a quarterback of the future right now. And with that said, the quarterbacks in this draft are not very impressive, and the Dolphins should continue to rebuild that defense. It seems like the secondary now has some solid pieces, but the run defense has not been good, and Raekwon Davis is an interior beast along the defensive line and can play multiple positions regardless of the scheme that they're running. Then I've got the Detroit Lions selecting LSU linebacker Devin White. The Lions defense has been getting abused by running backs in the passing game. Jared Davis has not been nearly as good of a prospect as I thought he would be coming out of Florida, but Devin White is a much more promising prospect than Davis at this point. I'm a huge fan of Devin White as a prototypical linebacker for today's NFL and moving forward. Then I've got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers selecting Mizzou quarterback Drew Lock. Buccaneers fans were so triggered when they saw my last mock giving them a quarterback in the 1st round, claiming that Jameis Winston was their quarterback of the future. Well, he's been benched now for turning the ball over in some of the ugliest ways imaginable. It's pretty clear that he's not going to be re-signed. If Dirk Cutter isn't fired, my prayers go out to you Bucs fans, but he probably won't want to draft a quarterback because this team isn't good enough to win despite a rookie quarterback, and he'd likely be fired the following season anyways. Altogether, I think it's time for a fresh start, and Drew Lock or Will Grier maybe would be good options to start over with for this team. The offensive weapons should ease the transition for a rookie quarterback, but the defense is going to need a lot of depth with the remaining draft picks for the Buccaneers. Got the Jacksonville Jaguars selecting Iowa tight end Noah Fant. If the Jaguars go into 2019 with Blake Bortles as their only starting option at quarterback, then they just deserve each other at this point. While I expect them to address the position, I don't expect it to be in the 1st round of the draft. This would actually be a decent place for Ryan Tannehill to land, but regardless of who plays quarterback for the Jaguars in 2019, it's clear that letting their top receiving threats walk in free agency last year was a mistake, and it's time to replenish the weapons. Noah Fant is one of my favorite prospects in this draft, and if a team drafts him in the top 10, I really wouldn't be surprised. I've got the Seahawks selecting Michigan defensive lineman Rashawn Gary. Michigan fans were also among those triggered by my last mock draft because it didn't have Rashawn Gary in the 1st round. Gary came into the season with a lot of hype around him, but I feel like that was a lot of projection of the season that he could potentially be having. He hasn't produced to that level of expectations, and with the defensive line in this draft and the injury that he was dealing with earlier on, I don't know if he even declares for this upcoming draft. Michigan will have their best team in a decade next year, and if he comes back to contribute, he could be the top defensive lineman in the 2020 draft. But the Seahawks love defensive players with versatility, and Rashawn Gary fits that mold with his ability to play on the edge or kick inside to maybe play as a 3-tech defensive tackle. We've got the Titans selecting Greedy Williams. The Titans defense is not what's holding the Titans back right now, but they've already spent so many resources on the offense in the past, and getting a cornerback prospect like Greedy Williams at this point makes too much sense. Malcolm Butler has not been playing well. He looks like a bust in free agency, so they might as well continue to solidify their defense as a strength. As far as fixing the offense go, they should really look at maybe a change in play calling or their scheme offensively, because on paper this unit should be much more efficient. I've got the Cincinnati Bengals selecting Alabama linebacker Mack Wilson. Another year and another linebacker mocked to the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals have had a relatively talented roster for a while now. They could probably benefit from improving the offensive line here, but Mack Wilson is the next great middle linebacker from Alabama, and they're going to need it with the new defensive coordinator coming in next year to replace Terrell Austin after just a completely failed year with him. Got the Colts selecting Mississippi State edge rusher Montez Sweat. The Colts offensive line has really improved this year, and this will be the first year where they don't get mocked in offensive line for probably the past few years. The defense also looks a lot improved under new defensive coordinator Matt Eberflus, despite using smoke and mirrors and spare parts to fill up their unit back there. They've got a tackling machine from last year's draft class, but the pass rush and secondary still need to be addressed early and often in this draft. Montez Sweat or Josh Allen should be at the top of their draft board by the time the Colts are on the clock. With the pick acquired from trading Amari Cooper to the Dallas Cowboys, I have the Raiders selecting wide receiver N'Keal Harry out of Arizona State. With the pick acquired by trading their top wide receiver, I could see the Raiders restocking the wide receiver position with a nice big target who is great after the catch in N'Keal Harry. After DK Metcalf suffered a season-ending neck injury, N'Keal Harry is my next top wide receiver on the upcoming draft. AJ Brown is also a good prospect too, but if I'm drafting a wide receiver in the top 20, I'm looking for a guy with good size and an elite ceiling. Obviously, you're not getting Calvin Johnson or Julio Jones outside of the top 10, but guys like DeAndre Hopkins and I don't know, some of you guys might remember Anquan Bolden. These were bigger wide receivers whose vertical speed was questioned coming out, and they still became elite receivers in the NFL. N'Keal Harry is a jump ball threat as well as a rack threat. He's also only 20 years old, which is 4 years younger than Amari Cooper, and he fits into the 10-year plan of John Gruden. Then I've got the Atlanta Falcons selecting Clemson defensive tackle Dexter Lawrence. In a draft with normal defensive line depth, Dexter Lawrence is getting drafted much higher than this in my opinion, but he falls a bit this year because he's more of a one technique than a complete three technique. The Falcons have been trying to find a guy like this for a couple years now, going back to the 1-year trial with Dontari Poe. Grady Jarrett is one of the most underrated defensive tackles in this league, but he's definitely a penetrating undersized three technique, and he needs a guy like Lawrence to play alongside and just eat up blocks for him. You're not going to spend an early first-round pick on just a run stuffer though, unless you're the Bucks, of course. But Lawrence isn't just a fat guy to plug the middle. Guys his size shouldn't possess the athleticism that he has, and he's got 3 technique traits in a 1 technique body. Terrell McClain is a stopgap player right now for them, doing the same thing for the Falcons that Lawrence would provide, but on a smaller scale. It might not be the Falcons' most glaring need on paper, but they've shown in the past that they're not drafting in the first round what you think is their most pressing need. It's going to be the best player on their board. Alright, then I've got the Green Bay Packers selecting Kentucky defensive end Josh Allen. The Packers could be in for a major overhaul this offseason, coaching-wise at least. Who knows what kind of defensive scheme they could be running next year, but I do know that I would trust a guy like Josh Allen to be an all-around edge rusher regardless of their scheme. Clay Matthews is getting a little bit old, and Nick Perry has never really become as dynamic of a player as I anticipated, but I know that Josh Allen has got a really high ceiling and is one of the big reasons that Kentucky made a turnaround this year. Then I've got the Baltimore Ravens selecting Ole Miss wide receiver AJ Brown. The Ravens don't particularly need a wide receiver, but they should consider getting one. In his final season as the Ravens GM, Ozzie Newsome put in a general managing clinic for GMs around the league. He crushed it in the draft, and then in a more underrated move, he signed 3 veteran free agent wide receivers to revamp a wide receiver core that needed some new players, just to see if they could revive Joe Flacco's career one last time. To me, this was a really shrewd move, instead of getting rookie wide receivers who can take a little while to develop. Even though the moves were still solid, it didn't really help with the production of Joe Flacco, and it's time to surround Lamar Jackson with dynamic weapons on the outside to give this offense some really bright pieces to build on. They could look to address the running back position with a true stud instead of a group of guys, but the running back depth is a lot better later on in this draft, and getting one of the top wide receivers as early as possible should have a higher priority. Got the Redskins selecting Notre Dame linebacker Tevion Coney. The Redskins defense was one of their bigger surprises this year, most notably along the defensive line. Last year's first-round pick, Deron Payne, turned out to be an absolute beast alongside his college teammate Jonathan Allen, and this has probably made the biggest impact to the Redskins defense, with the defensive line just stuffing the run game on a regular basis. The Redskins linebackers have played well, and Zach Brown did just sign a 3-year deal this past offseason, and Mason Foster to a 2-year deal, but neither of them are getting any younger, and I don't see them as part of their long-term plans with those contracts. Tevion Coney is an instinctual linebacker, and he's a tackle machine. He'd be a perfect fit as an inside backer in a 3-4. With the pick acquired in the Khalil Mack trade, I have the Raiders selecting Alabama safety Deontay Thompson. So with the previous 2 first-round picks, the Raiders addressed defensive end and wide receiver, the 2 positions that they traded those picks away for. That might seem like an oversimplification of things, and I agree with that, but those are crucial positions to have key players at, and they're also the Raiders' biggest needs at this point. However, I'm not going to be surprised if they fill another need with the second of those 3 picks and save wide receiver for last. Taking Deontay Thompson would be a solid move, since apparently neither of their highly drafted safeties recently seem to be in favor with John Gruden, so much so that they even let Obi Melifonwu go after 1 season. But Deontay Thompson is neither of those guys and could be a really good safety at the next level, and you know, he's used to playing on a really top level defense. I've got the Philadelphia Eagles selecting Oklahoma offensive tackle Bobby Evans. Jason Peters has had an amazing career, and the Bills are stupid for ever letting him go in the first place. Despite the bad injury luck, Peters has been one of the best left tackles in Eagles history, but he's 36 years old, and he's just been too injury prone as of late to rely on him for 16 games. The backup offensive tackle, Vaitai, has been solid in spot duty, and that's probably where he should stay. I'm no offensive line expert, but Bobby Evans should be one of the top offensive tackles drafted in April, and could be groomed to be the starting left tackle for the future for the Eagles. I've got the Houston Texans selecting West Virginia offensive tackle Yodny Cajuste. It's no secret that the Texans offensive line has been awful for a while now, and Deshaun Watson has been making up for it with his mobility. Like I said, I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be an offensive line expert and know that I've got all these guys scouted to a T, but this guy Yodny Cajuste is the starting left tackle for a pretty good offense and is one of the guys that I'm hearing really good things about. I tried to keep my eyes on him during the Texas-West Virginia game, and he seemed like he moved pretty well and he's pretty athletic. Early on, this offensive tackle class seems like there's a lot better options than there have been in the past year or so. So if it's not Yodny Cajuste, I could definitely see the Texans going with another offensive tackle in the first round. Then I've got the Carolina Panthers selecting Florida edge rusher Jachai Polite. The Panthers have returned to form this year despite that blow up on Thursday Night Football against the Steelers, and with the help of North Turner, they've been able to maximize the ability of Cam Newton and his talent. They went offense in the first round last year with DJ Moore, who was my favorite all-around wide receiver last year, but I think he's going to take some time to really develop, and luckily Devin Funchess looks like he's a much more polished wide receiver this year. So switching to the defense, with Julius Peppers likely retiring after this season, if not maybe next, the Panthers are going to be lacking in the pass rush department, and Jachai Polite is one of the last good ones in the first round of this draft. I could also see the Panthers adding some free agency pass rush maybe and drafting a cornerback here, but with Polite still on the board, this makes this selection a lot easier. Then I've got the Pittsburgh Steelers selecting Notre Dame cornerback Julian Love. The Steelers need defensive backs pretty badly. They've been getting by with lighting up the scoreboard, but the problem is that their defense has been allowing the same thing to happen on the other side. Joe Hayden can't play forever, and Artie Burns is never going to live up to his draft status, and the Steelers don't have a great track record for selecting defensive backs in this draft, but that doesn't mean that you stop trying to address the secondary because they desperately need one. Reaching on a pass rusher here would also be an option, but I think you just have to anticipate that TJ Watt's going to take another step, and maybe you re-sign Dupree. Alright, and then I've got the Minnesota Vikings selecting Ole Miss offensive tackle Greg Little. Signing Kirk Cousins looks like a great move after 1 year, but Kirk doesn't have the greatest pocket presence, and when the pocket seems to break down, so does he. You're going to need to give him ample time to find these great weapons outside, and Greg Little could also contribute to a much more successful running game, which would also take some pressure off of that defense and let them return to form of 2017. I've got the Los Angeles Chargers selecting Alabama defensive tackle Quinnen Williams. The Chargers defense is a solid nose tackle away from being one of the best units in the NFL. On paper, this defense has talent at every single level, but injuries have been holding the Chargers back for as long as I can remember. Quinnen Williams is being lauded as one of the breakout players of the year, and some are even comparing him to Ed Oliver. I'm a little bit hesitant because I still believe that the supporting cast can make a huge difference, and there's no supporting cast in the country better than the one that Alabama has provided this playmaking defensive tackle. Either way, I think that a defensive tackle will be an ideal spot for the Chargers to go early on in this draft, just because there's so much talent that you're bound to be able to still be a successful team. I expect them to be one of the bottom 4 picks or so and still be able to get a really impactful defensive tackle in this draft. Got the New England Patriots selecting Oklahoma wide receiver Marquise Hollywood Brown. The Patriots will probably re-sign Josh Gordon in the offseason, but they were still looking for playmakers on the outside at the NFL trade deadline. Tom Brady might retire this offseason because he does not look like the same guy we've seen over the years, and that might change things here drastically. But until then, the Patriots are in win now mode and will want to add weapons like Hollywood Brown that could make an instant impact for them. Got the Los Angeles Rams selecting Michigan linebacker Devin Bush. I think the Rams looked at the edge rush class and didn't like the fits for their 3-4 defense moving forward for where they anticipated picking, and that had to factor in on them pulling the trigger on the Dante Fowler trade. Assuming they extend Fowler, they should move to addressing the inside linebacker position. Devin Bush has been a beast for the Wolverines and is a key reason why they've got the best defense in years in Ann Arbor. And say what you want about him and his actions at Michigan State, the Rams could use a linebacker with his temperament versus what they've got right now, and he would fit perfectly into giving that Rams defense a little bit of attitude other than Aaron Donald. I've got the Kansas City Chiefs going back to the Washington defensive back pool and selecting cornerback Byron Murphy. The Chiefs have the best offense in football, clearly, but they're using spare parts in their secondary after moving on from Marcus Peters. Hopefully Eric Berry can get healthy and get back on the field as soon as possible and then have a healthy 2019 season, but until then, the Chiefs are still going to need more players in that secondary. It's not often that you see trading a future first-round pick to work out this well, but with the pick acquired from the New Orleans Saints, the Green Bay Packers selected number 32 overall, Kansas State offensive tackle Dalton Risner. The Packers got some edge rush earlier in the first round, and now it's time to get Aaron Rodgers some help up front. The Packers offensive line used to be their strength, and they need to get back to that if they're going to be able to take advantage of the final years of Aaron Rodgers. That's going to do it, guys. I hope you enjoyed just the meat and potatoes of this mock draft here. Once again, please leave me some constructive criticism in the comments. Let me know what you guys thought, things you'd like to see more. If you'd like me to focus more on the players or the positions of need for the teams going forward. Don't forget that the goal for this video is 500 likes, and I will have a new mock ready right after week 17 when the order of the top 20 is completely set. Thank you guys for watching, commenting, subscribing, all that good stuff, and I will see you in the next video.